Hello, my name is Pierce Langdon and I work as a program coordinator in the Department of Jet Program Management at Clare, and this is the presentation for useful information for ALT's Senior High School Edition. Alright, so there are two essential aims for this session. The first is to help lessen the gap between expectations and reality and help you settle in. And the second is to help you become basically an effective or a successful ALT. And you've probably heard a little bit about being an ALT, maybe online, or you've heard it from friends. And hopefully you've at least taken a look at the General Information Handbook, the GIH. There's also an ALT handbook, as well as some good resources on the AJET homepage. I'll talk about those a little bit later. But it's a bit more difficult to find information specifically about junior and senior high schools. So this presentation is going to talk about useful information for ALTs with a slightly junior and senior high school perspective. And on the second point, what we want to do really is provide kind of practical and actionable advice about how to succeed as an ALT and be effective. And by this, I mean, of course, doing your actual job well on a day-to-day basis, and contributing your knowledge and your skills to your school. But I also mean kind of just getting the most out of your time on JET in terms of personal and professional growth, having a smooth transition to life as an ALT, and developing a good relationship with your coworkers and your students. So let's go ahead and get started. And I think it would help to start off with a quick overview of the school structure in Japan. As you can see, elementary school lasts for 6 years, from roughly ages 6 through 12. Junior high school is for 3 years until about age 15, followed by 3 years of senior high school. And after this, many students do go on to university, or junior college, or a specialized training college. And notice that the compulsory education actually ends after junior high school, although the vast majority of students do go on to high school. And here you can see a breakdown of private and public schools in Japan. And some JET participants are placed in private schools, and private schools make up about, as you can see, 25% of all senior high schools in Japan. Here are a few of the types of schools that you're going to see at the junior and senior level. So you have academic, starting in the top right, and this sounds a little bit redundant. You would think that all schools would be considered academic schools, and yeah, that is the case. But essentially, this designation is given to schools at which students kind of choose a course, usually between liberal arts and sciences. Most of the students in these schools are going to go on to university, and there is kind of a heavier focus on entrance exams for universities as a result of that. So that's the academic type, and that is by far the most ubiquitous type that you'll find in Japan, as well as on the JET program. You have vocational schools going counterclockwise here. I'm going to show a few pictures of vocational schools in the next slide, but they are, as they sound, kind of training specialized skills. And then you go into kind of the less common ones after that. You have part-time and special needs schools. Then you have the blue ones at the bottom right, which are super global and super science. And these sound pretty super. Essentially what they are is you have government funding that is given to these types of schools. They are designated by the government as having certain special programs and curriculums, and they use this extra funding to sort of push in these specific directions. So for example, at a super global high school, you might have it might be more common to see schools that have sister relations with schools found overseas, and they might have exchange programs set up between schools in Japan and various schools abroad, where they exchange students and go on kind of a language and cultural exchange. And so it is quite rare to see JETs placed at these types of schools, although it has happened in the past, including one ALT who had a science degree and actually taught science at the super science school. And so that can be quite interesting, but definitely a rare case on the JET program. And here we have the aforementioned vocational schools. The Japanese is Senmon Koto Gakko. And really what these are, just as they are elsewhere in the world, it's to provide students with these practical skills to employ in the work world. And you have varying levels of English skill and motivation. Many of the students at vocational schools will not going to university, so there tends to be less focus on textbooks and entrance exams, but what that also means is you're going to have more freedom to teach communicative English in class, such as survival English classes and things like that. Another feature of these is that you're typically going to see the vocation itself in the name of the school. So for example, looking at the second one, Shogyo, commercial, Tokyo Commercial High School might be a very typical name. I have no idea if that school exists or not, but if it did, I wouldn't be surprised. It's very obvious just looking at the name of the school to see what the vocation, the specialty of that school is going to be. Here are a few pictures of students at these schools. Okay. And with that, I'd like to move on to kind of the bulk of today's presentation, and that is what makes a successful ALT. And so we have 4 different aspects, which are good communication, professionalism, knowledge of Japan, and getting involved. And here we have our poor little ALT friend. He's looking a little bit distressed at the moment, so let's see if we can make him feel better by first talking about good communication. And so I think a good starting point for talking about communication is looking at the chain of communication. It's important to know who to talk to if you have a question or a concern, and your main point of contact is probably going to be your supervisor. And this is tantosha in Japanese. It could be a Japanese teacher of English with whom you're going to teach. This could be one and the same person, but it's useful in any case to know the various roles of the other teachers and staff members, just in case your main point of contact is not available or if they're busy. And so I want to give you just a quick rundown of the school faculty. At the top you have the principal in purple. This person will act as the face or the representative of the school, giving a lot of speeches at major ceremonies and things like that. Then you have the vice principal in green, who takes on more of the daily management, the running of the school. Any questions that you have about taking time off and the school schedule are eventually going to land on the vice principal's desk. That, as the sort of manager, so to speak, of the running of the school, the vice principal will pretty much have the final say on you taking leave and things like that. Below these two you have kind of just the general teaching staff as well as the school nurses. As for the teaching staff, obviously you're going to be placed in the teacher's room in all likelihood, and so you're going to be spending most of your time with your fellow teachers. And not just English teachers, but of course, math teachers, history, science, etc. And so if you have any questions about workload, lessons themselves, teaching itself, any questions or comments about students, things like that, all of that is going to be best directed towards the teachers, because obviously the teachers are the ones who are mostly involved in those matters. School nurse, you'd probably only go see if you have if you need to take a rest, if you have a really bad, stomach ache or headache and you're not feeling well, you want to go lie down for a bit, you can go to the nurse's office. If you have questions about maybe nearby hospitals or clinics, things like that, if you have a more serious problem, they may or may not have a running list of clinics in the area. They should. Whether they can provide that in English is another question, but probably working together with your supervisor or a fellow Japanese teacher or any English-speaking teacher, you can get information about that kind of translated for you. And then you have at the bottom here, you have the office staff, accountants, things like that, as well as part-time staff. So as far as the office staff goes, all of your paperwork, your healthcare card, your salary and taxes, all of that is handled by them. And so questions about those things can be directed towards them. Now, as far as when to ask about any of this, really. Of course, you want to have these conversations as soon as possible. If you have a question about your schedule, concerns about workload and things like that, you want to have those conversations as soon as possible. But use your powers of observation to see if they're busy, if that person you want to talk to is, just completely piled up with work right now. Maybe you want to just wait for a second, wait until they are having a coffee break or something like that, and then see if you can sneak in a conversation then. A few more really quick points about this communication chain in general. If you're really unsure about who to talk to about a certain issue, it's usually best to start with the people closest to you. So start with the teacher staff. Look at that, find who is available, who has time to talk about something. Try not to jump authority. So if you have something, I think that this is kind of a common rule in most firms, like banks or insurance firms. If you want to take time off, ultimately you do have to get the principal's stamp of approval, but you're not going to go to the principal directly. You're not going to jump over the vice principal's head to do that. So you want to follow this, kind of chain of command and communication, and submit your request for leave through the vice principal, which will make it it'll make it up to the chain, to the principal, and then once you get his approval, it's going to make its way back down to you. And so just following that kind of communication chain is going to I think, help you out in the long run. And of course, lastly, face-to-face communication can be difficult. It is the most efficient way to talk to people, of course, is to just sit down and have a conversation. But as you're going to find out, it's really hard to get time, get people to sit down and have a chat sometimes. Because people are busy, and so you want to be flexible about how you communicate. You can use anything from email to starting a text, like a texting group among your English teachers, for example, using sticky notes even, putting those on each other's desks, things like that. Just whatever works to get your conversations across is going to help you. So, in addition to teaching their subject or grade level, most teachers are also responsible for various other types of duties around the school as well. Schools in Japan aren't considered simply a place for academic study. They're also thought of as places for students to learn life lessons as well. And for this reason, you might actually be a bit surprised at some of the duties that Japanese teachers have. For example, in addition to all of their teaching duties, your teacher's official work duties might include anything from homeroom, such as keeping in touch with parents, visiting the students' houses. I mean, this all kind of goes into being the homeroom teacher and being kind of the sole class manager. You've got club activities, kind of these after school, such as sports. Many teachers are actually coaches for these clubs. They supervise training after the school and on weekend. They go to the games on the weekends with students, cleaning the school with students, career counseling. The list just goes on and on. And I think that it's important to kind of just understand what the workload is. And here you have some of these basic, teaching related ones. But looking at this chart, what we have here is an average amount of hours spent working and teaching per week. And it's broken down into hours spent inside of the classroom, actually teaching, and then the total working hours. And so you can see the average is about 20 hours inside the classroom and about 40 hours total per week. And we'll zoom in to the Japan part of this, which is right here. And as you can see, Japan, remember I said it was about 20 hours of in-class instruction, and Japan is actually a little bit lower than that. It's about 18, 19 hours of in-class instruction. But the average of total total working hours per week was about 40. And as you can see, Japan's bar just keeps going and going and going beyond even 50 hours per week. And so Japanese teachers do put in their overtime, and the reason for this is just this, a laundry list of activities that just go on, and I could make several slides with all of the duties that teachers have. And really, the upshot of all of this is that it's important to understand how busy your Japanese teachers are going to be. And understand that a lot of them do want to, most of them obviously want to interact with you more. They want to talk with you. They want to have meetings about your classes and things like that. But simply, they're going to find it difficult to find the time to actually do that. And so the onus is going to be a little bit on you to approach them about lessons. Try not to hesitate too much, even though they might look busy. And I said, try to be careful about bugging people when they're busy earlier. The fact of the matter is good communication is essential for smooth team teaching. And so you will have to find a time and a way to communicate that works for both of you. I personally used email a lot. I was also in some online chat groups using an application called Line, which everybody uses here. And yeah, one of my JTEs was just way too busy during the day to plan lessons with me, and so I would kind of do most of that correspondence via email, and it worked out perfectly fine. One of the kind of benefits of teachers having all of these extra responsibilities is that they actually do, end up having a lot of interaction with their students. So there tends to be in Japan a very strong bond between teachers and students. And the teachers end up knowing a lot about their students, which is going to help you when you're planning your lessons and trying to get a feel for how lessons might go down in certain classes. And so I want to just look at a couple of quick examples of the chain of communication. Let's just take a quick problem here. We have some stomach problems and we want to go see a doctor, and I want to go to a clinic. So, who do I talk to? Who do you think you would go to for advice? And I would personally say, if you've had a moment to think about it, I would personally go with the school nurse first. That person is probably likely to be able to provide advice on local clinics, like I mentioned before. You could also reach out to someone called your prefectural advisor, or your PA. Hopefully you're going to have a chance to meet this person, or at least receive information about them at your local orientation after you've arrived at your placement. Your PA should have information about clinics in your area. Hopefully they'll have some English-speaking doctors in that list as well. If necessary, you might be able to ask a Japanese-speaking staff member at your school with you to come to the clinic. You may be able to ask your PA as well. But if this isn't possible, you might be able to ask your Japanese friend, or there may be someone that your PA knows who can help you out with that. But really, more than anything else, your health is very important. So please do make sure that you, if you're having any complications, get the help you need early by communicating with others and trying out all the options that you have available. I should point out that, related to this, sick leave can be an issue. In terms of how you use it. Most organizations, of course, do have sick leave, but in terms of what documentation is required, some organizations might ask you to submit a receipt from the hospital, for example. So just having a conversation ahead of time with your contracting organization about the necessary procedures and conditions for taking sick leave is going to help you avoid some headaches down the line. And let's say you want to take a few days off to travel. So how should we go about doing this? Well, what I would do first is I would not book my transportation just yet. Hold off on that for now. What I would first do is confirm how many days of paid leave I have left. And then I would look at the school events calendar, the schedule, before I do anything else. Kind of get my own rough plan in order and make sure that it's not going to get in the way of anything major at school. Given that you will be working in a school, it's probably going to be preferable that you take your vacations during the scheduled breaks in the school year, such as between semesters or over New Year's, etc. But of course, there are going to be times when you're going to want to take time off outside of these break periods. So you should consult with your school as early as possible about your paid leave plans, just to avoid these misunderstandings. One thing to keep in mind is that substitute teachers are pretty much unheard of in Japan. And so your Japanese coworkers generally can't take time off, or at least multiple days off in a row during the school year. And so in a lot of cases, you're not going to have a substitute teacher either. And so do keep that in mind when you're taking days off. As far as who to talk to, I would first talk to the other teachers with whom I'm scheduled to teach on those days. Tell them far in advance, and generally they're not going to have any problem with you taking leave. If it's a longer vacation, then you probably want to reach out, at least a month in advance, I would say. The longer you're planning to be away, I would say the more advance notice you should probably give. And last, your school might ask about your itinerary and how they can reach you while you are away, especially if you're going abroad. This might be kind of seen as an invasion of privacy, but try not to overthink it. Really what they want to know is just how to get a hold of you in case of an emergency. They just kind of want to know where you're going to be, just in case something happens, like a large earthquake in Japan, maybe if you get hurt or lose your passport, or there's a natural disaster wherever you're visiting. The school just kind of wants to be on the same page as far as where you are, so they know whether or not you've been affected by such things. And so what am I driving at with these previous examples? I think that one of the most important things that you're going to learn on the JET program is that good communication helps to build good work relationships. And I know this sounds kind of like common sense, but just looking at the frequency and quality of the communication, what you want to do is do your part to initiate conversations and be flexible, be proactive, make persistent efforts to keep up communication. It is going to require effort on your part. And asking others if you can help is a great way to build working relationships and increase communication, even if it's something really simple like moving boxes or desks or something, filling up the hot water pot, things like that. Maybe if some schools might have students cleaning still, cleaning the classrooms, cleaning their work areas, things like that. After school, you can join in with that. There's a lot you can do to get involved. In general, I recommend being specific about asking if you can help. If you see a teacher grading a stack of papers, you should ask, can I help you grade those papers? Rather than just asking very generally, is there anything I can help with? Because they're probably going to say, oh no, don't worry about it. Take it easy. You've been working hard enough. If you ask a general question, it's harder to answer rather than asking a specific question where they can kind of give you a specific kind of work to help with. And this also goes without saying, but showing up, going to events, things like that, and not just the mandatory ones. You've got these official ones like graduation, usually, opening and closing ceremonies, which I'll talk about later in this presentation. Usually these are pretty mandatory for ALTs to attend. But dinner parties, work dinner parties, I know given coronavirus and everything, a lot has changed in terms of this, but doing your best to get involved and attend events and showing up to these is going to transfer to the classroom and just generally contribute to overall better relations with your coworkers. And then we have better quality communication, which is kind of the other half of the battle. And so on this note, learning about your coworkers is very important. And I'm not just talking about your English teachers, right? Getting to know the teachers of other subjects and other staff members, even non-teachers, is going to help you make friends in the school. You just never know who you're going to click with and get along with more than others. It's going to give you a big support network for when you need help. And you're just going to feel like more of an integrated staff member rather than a foreign guest when you do this. Being polite and being professional, this is another very important one. If there's just for example, a decision or a policy or comment that bothers you and kind of gets under your skin, be professional about it. Try to avoid getting openly emotional in your responses to these. You should remain calm and composed, considerate of others. if you want to use something in the school, even in the teacher's room, that you haven't kind of already gained from permission to use in the past, you should always ask for permission to use things. And if you're going to be late for school, call ahead. Call the office, let them know that you're going to be late. Just really basic professionalism kind of stuff that really would be expected of any workplace, are also expected at your school. And I cannot stress the importance of studying Japanese. It opens so many doors. And on this note, Claire does provide Japanese language courses. They're completely online correspondence courses, which might not be everyone's cup of tea, but they are free. So it's a good place to start. There are beginner and intermediate and advanced levels. I think what you're really going to see yourself make progress in is probably going to be in-person community classes, things like that. Again, coronavirus notwithstanding, I do think that language classes are kind of on the rise again. They're starting up again. And so I would try to find these. Usually they're free or they're very cheap to attend. And even if you don't take formal Japanese classes, you're going to be surrounded by the language. So if you do, kind of engage in some kind of self-study, going out and just using the Japanese and practicing it with your coworkers, with friends, things like that, you're surrounded by the language on a daily basis from this point on, and you're in a perfect situation to improve your Japanese level. And so just take advantage of that, and make every effort to practice speaking and listening. And with a solid grasp of communication, our ALT friend has gone from an E to a D. Our grade has risen, but we've still got a ways to go, so let's move on to professionalism. Start off with the teaching staff room. And this is what a typical one might look like. And the main thing I want to focus on here is that it's a communal workspace. It must be shared, and part of being professional as an ALT is being considerate and aware of those around you, trying to avoid loud, distracting noises, things like that, keeping your workspace clean. This is all just, on the professionalism side of things, good to do. You might notice that Japanese people, especially at schools, do not wear cologne or perfume, and if they do, it's very, very weak. It's barely noticeable. If you typically wear cologne or perfume, your coworkers are almost guaranteed to find it pretty overpowering. The thing is, they're probably not going to say that to you. They're not going to bring it up with you directly. And so I'm here to say that to you now. You may want to look into getting some unscented deodorants. You can find them easily here in Japan. But at the very least, I would recommend against wearing cologne or perfume at work, as it will probably bother some people. And part of being proactive also means that you should eventually be able to collect information on your own. So keep an eye out for boards like this one in your staff room. This one has a monthly event calendar, student attendance, a 2-day schedule, information about staff members who are absent or on business trips, things like that. Of course, you might not be able to read Japanese, and so this might not seem like a very useful resource, but really, just ask a coworker, learn where things are written on the board so you can dissect them yourself later with the help of a dictionary, or maybe you can get, translation help later. But I would ask once you arrive at your school, ask your English teacher or another staff member if they can kind of help you find things on the board so that you can help yourself find it later on your own. And here we have a sample of a daily schedule. Don't worry about the Japanese if you can't read it yet, again, but you can make out the gist of what's going on here, right? You see the time slots, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are obviously the periods. And so you have lunch here in the middle of the day. The SHR stands for short homeroom. This is, homeroom itself is where students gather with their homeroom teacher, and they receive kind of updates about school events, various other important announcements, things like that. I recommend obtaining a copy of your schedule as soon as possible. Just get in the habit of confirming it on a regular basis. If you know that a school event is coming up, you could probably expect that there are going to be changes to that schedule. So, just don't assume that people are going to come to you all the time informing you of schedule changes and things like that. You need to be proactive about finding out where you need to be and when. And continuing with this idea of professionalism, I'm going to show a few pictures of people in various situations, and I'd like for you to just kind of think about what kinds of social faux pas they might be making. So here we go. Starting with the picture on the upper left, we have a person standing up and talking to her colleague who is sitting down. What do you think the faux pas might be here? And if you guess that the person sitting down should be standing up, you are correct, especially if the person wearing white is the person in blue's boss. So if someone, senior to you, your boss, is talking to you, comes to your seat and talks to you, you want to stand up and kind of meet them at eye level. It's just a sign of respect. If you stay sitting down when someone has come to talk to you at your desk, hopefully you have a very casual relationship with that person, because otherwise it's a little bit on the rude side, especially if that person is senior to you. How about the top right? We have a couple of men standing with their hands in their pockets, and so as you might imagine, that is what is the faux pas here. When you're talking to other people, when you're standing up, just really generally at any time, you do not want to have your hands in your pockets. It's, again, kind of a sign of, I guess, laziness, and it's a little bit disrespectful to the people around you. And so generally, people here do not tend to put their hands in their pockets, especially in front of students, as you are kind of expected to be a role model in terms of behavior for the students. Looking at the bottom left, how about this? So assuming he's at work, he's at his desk. Well, as you can imagine, he's got his headphones in, he's looking at his phone. Who knows what he's doing on his phone? And so even if it is work related, even if he's looking up a word in a dictionary for a lesson plan, I don't know. You have a work computer, in all likelihood you'll have access to one. And so the fact of the matter is nobody knows what you're doing on your phone, and so it's best to just kind of stay off of it. It is a little bit lacking in terms of professionalism if you're constantly on your phone, even in the teacher's room, outside, out of the sight of students. It's still, you never know what you might be doing on there. And so I would just stick to computers for work-related to, tasks in general. If you need to make a personal call, tell someone nearby and then step out of the room. Go to somewhere quiet that's not in the teacher's room, so that you're not going to be speaking, about non-work related stuff and maybe causing a nuisance for your coworkers. Looking at the fact that he's wearing headphones, again, you're in this sort of communal workspace, so on one hand, using headphones is a good idea if you're checking like audio materials for a class material or something like that, like a video that you're going to show in the class. But on the other hand, if you have both headphones in, you can't hear anything that's going around you. So if someone's calling you across the room, you might not be able to hear that. So I would just go with like the one in, one out rule. So just have like one in your ear, one out, so that you can still hear what's going on around you. And lastly, we have in the bottom right, we have a picture of President Obama sitting on a desk, and he's probably superior, I would say, to the person who's talking to him, but and so that the previous top left picture, I guess, could be a bit of a sign of disrespect. But really, the big thing is, in general, he's sitting on a desk. He's sitting on an object that is just not designed to be sat on. And so that is a big faux pas in Japan. You never want to sit or lean on desks. You don't want to put your feet up on a desk or a table. I see that all the time in American movies, and after having lived here for several years, I cringe when I see like these executive types putting their feet up on top of the desk, and you just do not do that in Japan. And so Moving on from these pictures, we also have, you may have this kind of setup in your school where there are bathroom slippers put in the bathroom. And the reality is this might be how it looks a lot of the time, but this is how you want it to look. You want, whenever you've used the bathroom and you've come back, you want to put these, line them up neatly so that the next person can put them on easily. And this might seem like a small thing, but schools do consider it, to be pretty important for students to learn these manners. And so, again, not only does it look nice to the staff members and the guests, but it just shows consideration for other people, and that's a very core Japanese value. With all of this said, no matter how hard you try, I promise you 100% you are going to make some kind of mistake with manners. That's okay. Making mistakes is how you learn. Hopefully, you don't make too egregious of a mistake in that learning process. But especially in Japan, where people tend to avoid confrontation, the thing is other people probably are not going to tell you if you have bad manners in a certain situation. And this is just kind of one reason why I recommend being constantly and persistently observant of what other people are doing. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Observing your teachers in class is going to help you further develop your teaching skills, and observing people around you in your daily life is going to help you adjust to daily life in Japan in a similar fashion. And you'll feel like, I guess, less of an outsider by doing that. And here we have the dress code. I'd like to just talk about a few pointers here. First of all, question, where would you draw the line between what is acceptable to wear at school and what is not? Personally, I would put the line right around here. The reason I think for this is starting with smart casual, you have blue jeans. Jeans are generally, in my experience, not okay to wear in a professional setting, not at a school at least. And I would say to the left of that, you're pretty much fine. You might be required to wear a tie, depending on your school. For the ladies, I would probably draw the line around the same place. I would say, again, you're moving into sort of, this very casual territory, moving into the right. This smart casual might still be acceptable, but again, if she's wearing jeans, and so, I would err on the side of safety and probably say just go with the business casual and more and higher. So again, really just, bottom line, dress conservative when in doubt. You really can never go wrong with this, especially starting out. I would just wear a suit your first day of school. You're probably going to be arriving when it's hot outside, and if that's the case, people are going to think you're crazy for wearing a suit your first day of school, but they'll appreciate it. It'll show that you are trying to be as professional as possible, and they're going to ask you to take your jacket off and probably take your tie off and relax a little bit. And when that happens, you can do that. Also, you want to dress for the occasion, and this goes without saying, but if you're doing sports day, you don't want to wear a suit. If you're going to graduation, you don't want to wear shorts. And so, if you're ever unsure, you can always just ask other teachers. And on that note, just observing your coworkers, talking to your teachers, looking at what they wear. In your first week or so, just observe what they're wearing and try to keep that same level of formality. This can be difficult because, at my personal, in my experience, I had a school where I had teachers wearing tracksuits. I had teachers who wore a full suit and jacket, dress pants, everything, bow tie, just the whole 9 yards. And so really there was just a range of, and I had one teacher who wore his judo outfit. He was the judo teacher, and he just wore his judo outfit. And so it's really just a range. And so I kind of went somewhere in the middle. I wore a tie if it was required, and I didn't wear it otherwise, and I just kept kind of a business casual look about it. Shirt tucked in, kind of, a little bit on the safe side, I guess, but I would say that's pretty fail-proof. One thing you might do is consider carrying a backup. You might or might, this might not be a realistic option for you, If you have a locker at your school, for example, you can keep a cheap suit in there. I bought a cheap suit from Uniqlo for less than $100 just to kind of have on the side, just in case. I knew I was going to need a black suit, and so I just kept that extra one just in case I forgot there was a big event or something. You never know when it might save you. If you drive to school, you could consider keeping it in your car, etc. Be mindful of things like tattoos, jewelry, things like that. They still have, tattoos at least have a negative image in Japan. And even if your school knows that you have tattoos in advance of you coming, they might still ask you to cover those tattoos. And you should respect their wishes. Be aware that, especially in rural settings, despite your best efforts to cover them up at school, if students see them when you're just out and about, going about your business around town, word does travel fast. And while some may feel that teaching Japanese people about the culture surrounding tattoos in their home country is actually, that in itself is a form of grassroots, two-way exchange, which it is, my I guess opinion is that schools are really not the best place to try this, given that schools are they tend to be on the conservative side. I would be careful about who sees your tattoos and to do a little bit of research on your end to see why they carry this negative image, in order to just better understand the culture here a little bit. And finally, I talked about jewelry for a second there. I would refrain from wearing too much makeup or too much jewelry. Do not dye your hair, because students are typically not allowed to do any of these things. And the point being, you're a role model for the students. If they see you with brightly colored hair or piercings, they might want to do those things too. And when they tell their parents are going to tell the teacher, and their teacher comes to you, it could get awkward. And so I think it just generally pays to be conservative and just observe what's going on around you, and kind of go with that. And before you just assume that it's okay to do anything, get permission first to wear certain things that might be a little bit on the controversial side. Japanese summers, lastly, they can be pretty hot, but please be mindful of exposing too much skin. Skin exposure is an issue. If you're wearing like a tank top or a low-cut shirt, even outside of work in your daily life, just be a little bit mindful of that, especially if you're in a rural area. And I have a quick quiz question. What color tie men wear at graduation ceremonies? What do you think? Is it red, white, black, or gold? And if you guessed white, you are correct. White is kind of an auspicious color in Japan. You wear it for celebrations. Black is actually for funerals. The other two do not have any particular meaning. Red is just a safe color, maybe for job interviews, things like that. And gold is just for when you're feeling pretty fabulous, I guess. So white ties for graduation ceremonies. Okay, and our ALT is making progress. He's gotten a grasp on good communication and now professionalism. So we've leveled up to a C here. And what I want to talk about next is knowledge of Japan and Japanese language. So a main part of your job on the JET program will be to teach English. But let's not forget about what the E in JET actually stands for, which is not English, it's exchange, right? So while you're not expected to accept all of Japanese culture or speak perfect Japanese, the more you know about Japanese culture and customs, and the more of the language you can understand and speak, the more opportunities you will have, and the better your experience on JET is going to be, period. And at the very least, you should learn enough Japanese to survive. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce a few of these basic greetings. You'll find that these kinds of set phrases exist in all aspects of life, not just in the workplace or in school. Like when you go into someone's house or you want to start a meeting, students say certain things before a class starts and at the end of class to show that they're ready to learn and they're thankful to the teacher for teaching them. So I just want to go through a few basic professional greetings that you're going to use on a very regular basis. The first one is Ohayo gozaimasu, Ohayo gozaimasu. And this means good morning. Just like in English, this is something that you'll use on the first contact of the day. And this actually means that you might hear people saying it in the afternoon, not just the morning, which might sound a little bit strange because it's translated as good morning, but basically you just say it when it's the first time you see someone that day. The next one is Otsukare-sama desu, Otsukare-sama desu. This is one of the ultimate greetings. You're going to hear it way more than words that you might already know, like konnichiwa, which actually you almost never hear, especially in the workplace. What this literally means is you must be tired, something like that, I would say. But it's really just a way to say hello to your colleagues in a way that acknowledges that they've been working hard. It can also mean goodbye between colleagues, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And I would say that this is too formal to use with your friends and your family. So if you say Otsukare-sama desu to them, I don't know, it sounds very formal and you're kind of distancing yourself from them when you use this polite phrase. Next we have Osaki ni shitsurei shimasu. Osaki ni shitsurei shimasu. This one might take a little bit of practice to say correctly. There's a lot of S's in it, so just practice it. What it means is, please excuse me for leaving before you, or it's rude of me to leave before you, something like that. You'll want to try to say this each day before you leave the office, as you're leaving the office, right? The other staff members, what they're going to say in response to this is actually the phrase above, Otsukare-sama desu. They'll probably say it in the past tense, which is Otsukare-sama deshita. Otsukare-sama deshita. Okay? So again, the order for this is, just a recap, whoever is leaving the office is going to say this bottom phrase, Osaki ni shitsurei shimasu, and everyone else around them is going to say in response, Otsukare-sama desu, or Otsukare-sama deshita. Okay? So, last we have another champion of greetings, which is Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. This phrase is incredibly difficult to translate into English. The meaning is vague and changes completely depending on the situation. Just to give you an example, it's always said at the end of your self-introduction. After you've talked about yourself, you've introduced yourself to a group of people. Like when you're meeting someone for the first time. And in this sense, it means just nice to meet you, basically. I guess you could translate it like that. I look forward to working with you, things like that. It can be used when you ask someone a favor. If you're asking a teacher to check an activity that you made or a lesson plan or something, you would say Yoroshiku onegai shimasu when you're making that request. And there are tons of other places where you use this. So I guess a general a rule that you could abide by, a guideline, is that if you hear it, you can usually respond by saying Yoroshiku onegai shimasu in response to this. But again, just, if you ever hear one of these or any other phrase and you just don't understand it given the context, ask somebody, ask your colleagues. I heard you use this phrase. I've never heard it used that way before. Why was it used like this? And they'll be happy to explain it to you. And I'm sure that you already know that bowing is a part of Japanese culture, but you might not know that there are actually different degrees of bowing in Japan based on the situation. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it is very particular and detailed, but basically I would say there are three very common types of bows. Here you can see there's 15, 30, and 45 degrees. The deeper you go, typically, the more apologetic or formal the occasion. So the first one, we have kind of this, I guess it's just like when you're passing somebody in the hallway, for example, you're going to sort of just nod your head. It's like a nod of the head type of bow. that you're just sort of showing deference to that person, you're just acknowledging them, their existence more or less, and you're not really pausing or anything like that. It's just a quick a lowering of the head, so to speak. Next, you have the 30 degree, which is usually you'll actually hold this one in position for about 2 to 3 seconds. You'll bow, you'll raise your head back up to the eye level, and this is probably what you're going to see at ceremonies, things like that. After you, maybe the principal goes up to give a speech. Before the speech, he'll bow to the audience. Everyone will bow to him or her, and then at the end of the speech, the principal will once again give a bow, and then everyone else will bow in response. And so this is the level you would use for like a speech or something like that in ceremonies. Then you have the final one, which is a 45 degree. This is very formal. And you're going to hold this in place for a few seconds. You rarely ever use this. It's just when you want to, maybe you've done something really bad and you want to apologize, you deeply regret what you've done, and you would use this bow in that case. So hopefully you never have to use the last one. The middle one you'll probably use quite often because it's used when you're, for example, when you're meeting someone for the first time and you give your short self-introduction, you'll use this bow after you've given your introduction. You also use it when you're exchanging business cards and things like that. That's the middle one here. And I mention all of this because as someone living and working in Japan, you are going to be expected to bow on many occasions. So you might want to practice doing it in front of a mirror. It sounds kind of silly, but have a coworker check. If you're worried, you can ask them to see, if you're doing it properly or not, and you can get some feedback from them. And it doesn't have to be perfect. No one's going to expect you to bow perfectly or anything. But I recommend just observing other people's bowing and then adjusting yours to match that level of formality. You may have heard of omiyage, which are an important part of Japanese culture. You can translate omiyage as souvenirs, but they usually refer to sweets which are individually wrapped for convenience and sold in boxes ideal for passing out to your colleagues at work. Normally, one gives omiyage out at the workplace when starting or leaving a job, or when coming back from a trip from somewhere usually far away, reasonably far away. Keep in mind that it's not required. You're not obligated to give out omiyage or these souvenirs, but it's just a nice gesture, and it can lead to interesting conversations with your coworkers. If you want to travel and not feel too guilty about using your paid leave, this might be a good way to go ahead and bring back and share some of the love with your colleagues. If you do go travel and you do not bring back omiyage, I would probably not suggest boasting to everyone about your recent trip. And if you haven't brought omiyage with you currently, don't worry about it. You're going to have plenty of chances down the road to share omiyage in the future. Some examples of omiyage are the Kit Kats that you can see here. There are way more than what you see on this slide. There are literally hundreds of different flavors sold throughout Japan. But I'd like to kind of actually not just Kit Kats, but show you some of the more traditional ones as well. Here are a few that you may have seen before, especially if you've maybe traveled in Japan before, or you're just interested in this kind of thing. Many locales throughout Japan have their own specialties. These ones are particularly popular. You have the Tokyo banana in the top left, the Shiroi Koibito in the top right from Hokkaido. In the bottom right from Kyoto, you have a Yatsuhashi, and then you have a Momiji Manju on the bottom left, which is from Hiroshima. And again, these are just the sort of popular ones. Every single location in Japan has their own thing going on, so wherever you go, you can definitely bet that there are going to be omiyage available for purchase. So this isn't something you want to stress out too much about. Again, you're not obligated to get them. But while we're on this point, I should go ahead and mention that there's an accepted way to give and receive objects between people in Japanese culture, especially when you're in a more formal environment like the workplace. So when you receive an important piece of paper or a business card, you want to use both hands when you receive it and when you give it. When you give objects to others, you want to use both hands. So you can see here, we've got the picture blurred out here, but you can see that they're using two hands to do this. Whether you drink alcohol or not, if you attend an inkai, which is the way to say work party, any place where drinks are served, be aware of the proper etiquette for pouring and receiving drinks, as well as the toast at the end. So what's going to happen is, in general, younger staff will pour drinks for the older, more senior staff, and those around you are actually going to be rushing to fill up your glass. So you probably never need to fill up your own glass. And in the same way, if you notice those around you have an empty glass or their drink is almost gone, it's polite to offer to pour them some more of whatever they're drinking, or to call an employee to bring another drink for them. When you're holding the bottle, you want to use both hands, and don't drink or eat anything before the official toast, which is in Japanese kanpai. Kanpai. It's important to know proper chopstick etiquette as well. You may already know how to use chopsticks, but there are a lot of little detailed etiquette issues that we just don't have the time to go into here. It's just a bit outside the scope of this presentation, but I think it's a good idea to read online a little bit about Japanese chopstick manners, because they might be different from the chopstick manners that you're used to, and it depends on how much you want to fit in, and how much you want to kind of adapt to the local customs and whatnot. But there are some very it's an easy way to offend people depending on what you do with your chopsticks. And I don't just mean playing drums with them. There are a lot of other things that you might think are okay, but they're absolutely taboo in Japan. So read up on that online, Japanese chopstick manners, in case that interests you. All right, so our ALT is doing really well now. Here we are, we're at a B. Finally, let's talk a little bit about getting involved, in particular at school. And before we get into this next section in earnest, it goes without saying that schools have been impacted by the coronavirus, including closures at the start of the pandemic and cancellation of major events. However, over time, schools and communities have been adapting in various ways, and it's probably safe to say that you will likely be able to experience most school events in some shape or form, even if they have been changed quite a lot. In the interest of not hindering learning opportunities for children, most schools have continued to hold in-person classes. Though many schools have incorporated distance learning and staggered school schedules, and in general, everyone is very good about basic preventative measures like wearing a mask, opening windows, keeping the classroom well ventilated and whatnot. So what I recommend at this point, and again, this is a bit outside the scope of this presentation, but follow the guidance given by your school and comply with all the local and national coronavirus mitigation measures. But I would like to go ahead and talk a little bit about the kind of basic school event schedule. And this is going to be kind of our final way to be an effective ALT. And this is to get involved in our school events. And I'm not just talking about English classes, or even just English club or any of those other extracurriculars. I'm talking about all of these school events that go on that don't necessarily have to do specifically with English. And for some of these events, your attendance is important, but you might not necessarily have a role. And this is probably going to be true for most ceremonies where you basically just need to be looking good. You just show up, be dressed appropriately, bow, clap at the same time as everyone else, and you'll be fine. But just your being there, basically, the fact that you're in attendance is a really big part of fitting in to school life. So first, let's talk about the entrance and opening ceremonies. So first we have the entrance ceremony. This is where students formally celebrate their enrollment in their new schools at the start of the school year in April. And next is the opening ceremony, which is also in April, where new incoming teachers formally introduce themselves to the students and their fellow teachers. In the late spring comes sports day, and you may find that your school has another sports day in the fall as well. I know mine did. Even if you're not really the sporty type, these can be a lot of fun and a real chance to get closer to your coworkers and your students in a much more casual setting. And if you're really lucky, you might get asked to join a relay race. It's basically just this long event. It's a day-long event where students will divide into teams, usually based on their homerooms, to compete in various athletic activities. You've got cheering competitions, relay races, you've got jump rope, tug of war, things like that. A lot of fun activities. It's actually such an important event that classes in the days leading up to the sports day might actually be outright canceled just so they can have additional practice time. Sports day is usually held on a weekend, although this is not always the case. Mine was held during the week. And whether you are participating as a part of work or if it's just totally voluntary, it's going to depend on your school, but you should go if you're invited, and do not be surprised if you're asked to participate in some events as well, and you absolutely should if you get the chance. Moving on, we have the school festival in the fall. And this is an absolutely massive event that is a lot of fun and is going to give you the chance to get more involved at your school. Here you can see students and parents ambling through the school grounds, enjoying food and entertainment, and almost everything is run by the students. Although you are probably going to see some teachers helping out. You can see the large banners hanging in the back. Those are also made completely by students, by hand. And it's as a means of creative expression, as you can see the different designs there. As the purpose of this festival is really to showcase student talent. That is really what is at the centerpiece of all this. So here you have some students manning a food stall. The proceeds from these are used for school clubs and other things that will benefit the students. And the name of this festival, Bunkasai, literally means cultural festival. So as you can imagine, it is more artistic in nature. If you have any artistic talent, this would be the perfect place to let others know. For example, I studied music in college and I sing as a hobby, so I did a couple of duet performances with other teachers in the auditorium during this festival. And we did the song More Than Words by Extreme. I did A Whole New World from Aladdin with the choir teacher at our school. He's this really big burly guy, and of course he was Jasmine, and he absolutely nailed the part. It was a lot of fun. So if you have any artistic talent, absolutely show it off. This is your time to shine here. Here are some students showing off their drum skills. And jumping all the way to March, we have the graduation ceremony. Here we have graduation, and even from the elementary school level, it's a huge deal in Japan. You want to be prepared for a high degree of formality, chorus performances, speeches from the principal and student representatives. You're going to have parents and students just crying their eyes out. It's just an emotionally draining day. Definitely wear your most formal attire for graduation and do not be late. And bring the tissues. Here are some students who have just graduated and have received their farewell cards that other students made for them. And after graduation, we have the closing and leaving ceremonies. And these are usually held some days after graduation. This ceremony officially brings that term or school year to an end for the students who are, of course, not graduating that year. And the last is the leaving ceremony, which is when you will see certain teachers say goodbye. They may be moving on to another job or transferring within the public school system, which is quite common, or they may be actually retiring outright. Usually they'll receive flowers and they'll say goodbyes to the whole school, and this can be another fairly emotionally draining event as well. Now for a word about getting involved in club activities. Club activities are an enormous part of many students' lives, especially when you get to the junior and the senior high school levels. If you would like to join a club, make sure to ask the teacher who's in charge to confirm that it's okay to do so at that time. For example, if it's a more serious club like baseball or something, women's basketball was very serious at my school. They might have an important match or competition that they're preparing for, so they might be very hesitant to let you just join on some random day, lest you distract the students from their practice or something. So just talk ahead of time to see if it's okay to join on a certain day. Also, you want to talk ahead of time with that teacher who's in charge, how often you intend to participate. What is your commitment level going to be like with this club? Are you going to be just dropping in every once in a while unannounced? Or is this going to be a kind of thing where you really get into it and you go to all of the practices, you go to the games on the weekends, things like that? Both are okay. It's just you need to be careful not to miscommunicate, that commitment level. You don't want to overcommit yourself and then, end up not showing up to certain practices or games and disappointing your students and the teacher. So looking at English clubs in particular tend to be something that many ALTs get involved in, of course. If they do exist at your school, they are going to be probably less serious and less demanding of the members. If you end up being in charge of the English club, it's a great way to interact with your students. Outside of the classroom, you'll probably have a little more freedom than you normally would in the classroom. If for some reason you can't set up an English club, lack of resources or something, you could, think of other alternatives. Maybe once a week you could have like an English lunch where you are available to, have lunch and chat with the students. And the rule has to be, everyone speaks in English, right? Which can be a really great incentive to have students go out and try English and, and embarrass themselves and just have fun and have a good time. Because that's how you learn, right? You go out and you actually make conversations. And so even if you cannot start an English club on your own, definitely look for other opportunities to get creative and work together with your Japanese teacher of English, your co-teachers, to see if you can come up with some unique and original ideas to get students involved in English after school. All right. So outside of school, you should look for ways to get involved in your local community. You can ask your coworkers, look online, or visit your city or town hall office to see what's going on in your area. And again, the E in JET stands for exchange. So remember that you are a cultural ambassador and that your actions and your behavior represent not only your country, but also everyone else on the JET program. And so even seemingly small gestures can go a really long way in building friendships and amicable ties between countries. So try to get out there and meet people and do get involved, even outside of school. And I'd like to start wrapping up the presentation by talking about why I think senior high school and junior high school as well are wonderful. Usually you're going to have more substance in your lessons is the first point I would like to make. You can dive deeper into more sensitive topics, more relevant topics to these students' lives, using materials like TED Talks or more complicated texts, getting into higher levels of debate and opinion exchange, and touching on, again, important like social and current events that are happening not only in Japan but in your country as well. These kinds of topics are usually much more interesting to engage in for students than for something that's very bland out of a textbook. And so I encourage you to try incorporating these types of lessons if you can. With that said, you absolutely do need to get approval for your lesson plan and topic ideas from your team teacher first. And you have deeper cultural exchange is the second point that I'd like to make. Students are more mature, they have a better grasp of their own culture, they can share their own life stories, they have more experience to draw on than the younger students do. They also have, I think, a great sense of humor. They've learned more about themselves and the world, and they've kind of grown out of that awkward early adolescent phase that makes junior high school students very shy and very unwilling to open up. So sometimes I guess near the end of junior high and the very start of junior high, students can still be kind of open, but right around the middle, like second year junior high, students can be quite shy, and it can be difficult to get them to open up. But once they've hit high school, of course, you'll still have some shy students, but I think the closer they get to graduation, the more down to earth they become. And with that, our ALT friend now has worked his way up to an A. And while these 4 points are not a comprehensive list of the qualities of an effective ALT, my former ALT colleagues and I believe that these are some of the most important things that you can pay attention to in order to make a good first impression, build solid working relationships, maintain a good reputation, and just overall be considered more of a full staff member than a foreign guest. Before we finish, I would like to mention that Claire also offers resources for ALTs via our official website. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the information that we've learned in this presentation and build on what we've learned today, do check out the ALT handbook in the current JETS section of the website. The handbook is a little bit out of date, but it is still relevant and useful as an additional resource. And we also have JETS submitted lesson plans by school level, filtered by school level, available on that same page under the Teaching Materials Collection section. And here's how to access these. You have the current JETS tab, navigate down to the handbook under Publications and Forms for JETS. And then once you click on that, you'll find these two links in particular. And not boxed is the junior high school classroom activities, which you can also use, of course. And here's an example of a lesson plan found in the Teaching Materials Collection. Okay, so finally we have grants for the JLPT, which is the Japanese Language Proficiency Test. If you're familiar with the levels, it goes from N1 to N5, N1 being the hardest, 5 being the easiest. The grant that we offer for this covers the 3 most difficult levels, 1 through 3. So we do not cover 5 or 4. But if you work your way up to 3 or above, the idea is we will reimburse the test fee if you pass any of those levels 1 through 3. For the TEFL, or the TEFL grant certification, essentially what this is, you take an online, it has to be a fully online TEFL course, at least 100 hours, and we will reimburse the cost of that course up to 15,000 yen, which will help you get TEFL or TESOL certification in a more affordable manner. Information about both of these goes around every year. You can find information on the JET program website. You can also look at past editions of Claire News, make sure that you're signed up for Claire News, and ask your supervisor, of course, if you have any questions about anything that Claire offers in terms of resources for ALTs. Okay, and with that, I would like to once again just welcome you all to Japan, wish you the best of luck during your time on the JET program. I hope that the information found in this presentation will prove to be useful to you during your time on JET, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.